Welcome to Chapter 5 of the Hilda Chronicles. This chapter is called Woodland Shrine. Vanaheim was mainly a large village, with its obvious attractions that stretch from bashing each other's teeth out in the local tavern to honouring dead animals in tanneries and preparing to kill more at the blacksmith's. That afternoon, the latter could be heard swearing to the gods when his elder son, Sutur, fell asleep on the job and brought the sledgehammer crashing down on his father's thumb while beating an iron sword into shape. The accident caused such a rumpus that half the town gathered round to laugh at the poor man blaspheming at the top of his voice. Hilda returned from the forest roughly the same time and deemed the moment inappropriate to exchange words with Sotur, who was playing an intense game of chase with his father. She added a mental note to do that later, while the man slept, and headed out instead to find Ivan, the closest person the village had to an apothecary. Most called her Volver the Witch, but Hilda knew that she had barely any Sadir magic in her at all, only vast quantities of herbal remedy and poisoning knowledge. Ivan lived outside the village walls, not far from the sea and the woods, and in her dwelling she would have the deadly infusion that Hilda needed to help Sutur confuse deep sleep with induced coma. On the way, a large brute, not looking where he was going, bumped into Hilda, knocking her to the frozen mud. He looked slightly delirious, having trouble finding what or who had attacked him. Hilda was scandalized and launched daggers from her eyes at him. She was also out of breath and couldn't utter a word when the oaf finally saw Hilda sitting on the ground and began another swearing competition. In this case, the man was literally foaming at the mouth. Hilda had seen this after effect before and was quite sure it had something to do with the Huldra's mist. These men and women had been brought back from the darkness too many times, and some villagers were starting to lose their sanity. The ogre didn't think twice and picked Hilda up by one of her ankles. He swore a lot more and threw Hilda into a barrel of ale. The wooden staves didn't break, but Hilda felt something crack in her chest and let out a cry of pain. The oaf strolled towards her and swung a leg backwards, preparing to kick the young woman's skull. Instead of hearing a squelching sound, when he was convinced his boot had reached Hilda's brain, he heavily fell backwards onto the floor. The man's dumbfounded expression would have been funny under other circumstances, although some spectators did get a laugh out of the fountain of blood spurting from his severed thigh. His sliced-off leg jerked spasmodically like a shrimp out of water beside the ale barrel. Hilda wiped the splatter of blood out of her eyes and saw Rasmund at her side, branding a crimson axe. What in hell are you doing here? Hilda managed to say, "You're welcome, sister. Our good father has pardoned Saul. His spirits are low, but his heart has a few embers left," said Asmund, lifting his sister to her feet and daring, with fiendish eyes, the one-legged man to get up. Hilda wanted to strike him, curse him, find a way to send him back to sea. But only bloody tears flooded from her troubled eyes. Asmund hid her under his coat and threw the axe back towards the tavern owner. The burly man was almost as impressive as the bleeding fool on the ground, but he limited his outbursts and complaints about the weapon that the prince had ripped off the entrance's crossed axe's insignia. "It will be all right, little Hilda. The winter won't be long." Hilda sobbed, even more bitterly against her brother's chest. How little he knew. One vernal evening, a group of young archers, holding torches, disrupted the deceiving calm of gloomy Nebelwood. They made enough racket to wake a dormouse, hoping to scare an elk out of hiding. Instead, 2 red foxes were startled in the middle of a fresh squirrel feast and darted out in front of the hunters. One at a time, the hunters took turn in aiming at the frantic game. The first blonde-haired archer struck gold, sending 2 arrows into the back of one of the foxes. The vixen rolled around, snapping off one of the shafts. The male turned to defend the vixen and was rewarded with an arrow close to the heart from one of the other hunters, roaring with laughter. They had been drinking, which didn't make much sense when risking your neck out in a dangerous environment filled with lethal beasts and other hunters with less talent. The sky was cloudy and the spring sun was setting, which provided the 2 foxes with a quick window of opportunity. They both scrambled behind a massive pine tree and involuntarily shifted into their human forms. Earlier, the couple had swallowed a small vial full of Huldra potion designed to maintain a human shape longer than usual. Morphing back to foxes to hunt a squirrel was a plan that had fatally backfired, and now they were cornered. "Run to the shrine! I'll keep them occupied," said the vixen telepathically to her badly wounded companion. The male Huldra didn't argue and bled his way to the small hills beyond the pines. The young men spotted the hobbling naked man with a bloody arrow in his chest and yelled at him to stop. They quickly realized they had nearly murdered a Huldra and knew that they were going to regret it if any others found out. An archer plucked another arrow from his quiver and aimed at the Huldra's head. The woman flew out of hiding and broke the bow in 2 with a powerful knee blow. The others were shocked at first, hurling their bows around like clubs, but then they saw who the assailant was. The hunters shared conniving grins and formed a ring around the unclothed woman. "Why don't we have a bit of fun before getting rid of it?" said one of the hunters. The other lewd men agreed and pinned the Huldra down, kneeling on her wrists and spreading her legs. A cumbersome lad undid his undergarments and fell to his knees. He loomed over the desperate Huldra and slid a sharp knife over her tanned skin. He placed an elbow, shoulder, and took his time cutting locks of ginger hair from the Huldra's bangs, covering her forehead. She struggled and tried to bite the man's face, but he only laughed back and imitated the wild snapping of her teeth. Another hunter wiggled the tip of an arrow that had perforated her right breast, and the Huldra spat blood into his face. This only infuriated the drunken hunters, who beat the Huldra until she grew quieter. Several moments later, when all men had finished with her, the female Huldra bled tears of pain. Waves of electric shocks whipped her brain from the splintered bones and bruised limbs. She was burning up inside and found her last flicker of life to channel her intense agony towards her hatred and spite. The men got dressed, gathered their bows and arrows, and were ready to crush the Huldra's head with a rock when the vixen's skin faded dark grey. Her ginger locks went jet black, and her fingers shot out bloody claws the size of small swords. With a circular movement, the Huldra slashed the hips of 3 hunters and dashed towards one urinating against a pine tree. She lacerated his genitalia from behind so hard that her razor claws got stuck in his shoulder blades. The big lad saw her struggling to wrench out her claws and rushed at her, only to fall belly forward onto her outstretched dagger fingers. That didn't stop the Huldra's rage, and she shredded what was left of them to bits. She immediately thought of her companion and hurried along a path leading towards a hillock close by. The dying Huldra gave furtive looks around her to check if any other hunters hadn't tracked her down. She felt a sudden cold breeze flow through her body on this warm spring night, and she thought her time had come. The shrine was only feet away. The shiny iron gate was open, and inside she found her lover covered in glowworms, sitting against the back wall. She fell into his stiff arms and held him tight, although he was already gone. The night grew colder than it should have been, and the female Huldra, bespattered in blood, finally closed her bruised eyelids. Kyoko woke up in a sweat. The nightmare felt as real as the cold wind howling through the cracked walls and the rusty iron gate. She touched her chest and couldn't find any arrows or wounds, apart from the self-inflicted one on her arm. And yet her head was pounding and her muscles were in flames. Her forest prison, to keep her away from the villagers, wasn't as dark as when she had fallen asleep. Fireflies were hovering around the statue at the back of her cell. She crawled over to get a closer look and realized it wasn't handmade. 2 human skeletons in each other's arms were in a sitting position against the far end cell wall. They were also entangled in ivy and the fireflies gave the couple an anachronistic Christmas tree aspect. Kyoko wasn't too perturbed by the dead body remains. She had seen her parents' dead bodies after they were found at the bottom of a ravine, weeks after their disappearance. And she had found her grandmother in the rice paddies, half eaten away by mountain macaques. On top of witnessing the disgusting death of that treacherous Takeshi, and seeing her hometown obliterated by a storm, she occasionally saw ghostly creatures, which she attributed to going slightly mad. The nightmare was a dream, but these bones are real, therefore not yet crazy, Kyoko thought, twiddling with the ivy leaves. Within, a cradle of stems around the belly region of the skeleton on the right. A couple of fireflies were trapped. The abdomen, swaddled in leaves, looked like a lantern. Kyoko delicately pulled a few stems to one side and saw another smaller skeleton above the hips. A fox cub. It must have fallen asleep and died of cold inside the skeleton long ago, thought Kyoko. Her mind flipped back to the Otarunai beach, where a fox disguised as a woman had warned her about Takeshi. Could the kid be this woman's child? Kyoko fell asleep in front of the dead couple, but didn't dream of them again. She didn't feel cold either while she slept, or when she woke in the morning. The pallid winter sun was up, but direct sunlight never reached Kyoko's prison. In the gloom of her ivy tomb, she was surprised to find a dozen round objects wrapped up in ash leaves beside her. Numerous animal tracks could be seen in the dust too throughout the cell, but no shoe or footprints other than the marks she had made crawling to the skeletons. Why should I be surprised? Said Kyoko to the dead bride and groom. You know, you actually remind me of Takeshi and I. The perfect couple on a summer night's eve. Now, what has the animal kingdom brought me for breakfast? She said, picking up one of the wrapped-up mysteries. There was a thin twig holding the tip and the stalk of the scarlet red leaf together. Kyoko pulled it out, and the opposing sides unfolded like a blooming flower. Kyoko peeled off the two asymmetrical sides separated by the midrib that were stuck to the snowy ball inside. She gave it a sniff and concluded it must be edible, only because she hadn't eaten since last morning on the Blade of Gold. Nevertheless, Kyoko chose to open the other wrappings too. The gift ceremony cannot be concluded until all gifts have been disclosed. In total, there were 5 soft, powdery balls shaped as skulls. Oh, what a thoughtful present. Thank you, Mrs. Oru. Kyoko displayed them in a circle on each of the red leaf wrappings. There were also 3 tough brown cubes she placed around the white circle, and one curious, delicate green heart that glistened as if it had been removed from the body of a heavenly monster. That one is called a stab apple, said someone in a dark corner of the cell. Kyoko should have been used to having the life scared out of her, but she screamed all the same, dropping the stab apple on the floor. Are you another ghost? Asked Kyoko, shuffling away on her knees to the other side of the cell. Do I look like one? Asked the young woman, wearing a wicker garment with bracken and leaves she had woven through flexible reeds. I do not know what ghosts are like in these horrible lands. So I see you've met the humans around here. Not all are bad, said the woman, walking closer to the skeletons. And some are as evil as Oni, as ogres, said Kyoko, staring at the dead couple. Were they kitsune? I am not familiar with that term. They were like I am, said the Huldra, morphing into a slender red vixen and straight back into a gingerhead woman again. Oh, Bake, exclaimed Kyoko, which meant shapeshifter. Have you not figured out yet how to keep your clothes when you transform? Asked Kyoko, watching the Huldra readjust the wicker garment that had fallen to the ground. Kitsune can. Well, this kid can't. Perhaps you could show me how it is done one day. I am Kara, said the Huldra, touching her forehead with 2 fingers and swiping her neck with 3 others. Ohayo gozaimasu. Watashi wa Kyoko desu. My name is Kyoko. You have such an exotic voice and features that I've never seen. Why are you here, Kyoko? Asked the Huldra, sitting down and curling up into a ball like a fox would. I am a prisoner. They call me witch. They think I have brought a curse to Vanaheim. Even Asmund left me here. Oh, I know Prince Asmund and his sister who left you to rot in this shrine they call a prison. Shrine? Asked Kyoko, crawling back next to the food. Kara extended an arm to caress the ivy crib of bones. You saw these Huldra in the woods, didn't you? I saw a lady, wounded and running for her life. She had arrows in her back, like in my dream. You mean these arrows? Said Kara, removing a snapped-off arrow from behind the vixen's skeleton. You can sense the dead, see them, smell them, can't you? We saw you in the forest when you arrived, seeing what wasn't there. This is a sacred fox shrine, to worship the 2 drogs that were murdered by hunters. The Dingbats of Vanaheim use this holy place to exile outcasts. But we won't let you go mad here, will we? Kyoko was too tired and hungry to keep up the conversation correctly, so she picked up the green heart and asked, Did you make these? They smell good too, don't they? I delivered them this morning to bring you hope, said Kara. And heal your arm. You're in pain, aren't you? Kyoko didn't reply, holding the arm she had bitten when she was lost at sea. Oh, but I'm sorry to intrude, said Kara, walking towards the gate. Please enjoy your meal. However, I advise you to leave the green stab apple for... Too late. Kyoko had already slipped the shiny heart between her lips and was rolling it over her tongue when she felt a bolt of lightning strike her heart. She collapsed on a patch of ivy, and her head rebounded off the vegetal cushion. Her eyes burst open, bloodshot. Kyoko, I told you to leave that one to last, said Kara, rushing over to hold Kyoko in her arms. You're too exhausted for the healing sweet. The emotional explosion could kill you. Kyoko looked up at Kara's freckled face, and waterfalls of warm tears spilled from her eyes. If you want to kill me one day, please give me 9 of those again, said Kyoko, seeing fox kids playing around the skeleton shrine. What is that last taste? The tiny caramel balls that crackle in your mouth while they ooze out chocolate milk. First time I've tasted that. First time I have cradled a putrid human. Next time I visit, you will tell me about where you come from. I will have my little helpers leave something to drink beside the gate. Not as delicious, I'm afraid, as the cinder nuts or scully combs. The white ones are the scary combs, Deska. The brown squares are cindiness, asked Kyoko, ready to doze off again. You guessed right, Kyoko. You'll be begging me for more cindiness and scary combs before I can hop back through that gate. Mark my word, said Kara, shifting back to her vixen form and snatching her wicker garment between her jaws. See you soon, Kyoko the vulva. Kyoko felt a sunrise of well-being from the stab to the hot sweet she had just eaten, and waved goodbye to the red fox springing through the black iron bars. 3 days passed, and Kyoko spent most of her isolation curled up, lost in a daze. She had eaten all the hellsots and didn't care about the cold or the solitude anymore. Being alone was something she was used to. Being abandoned was as well. But this felt different. She thought Asmund would be different, and yet here she was, shivering in a dark cell, licking icicles and waiting for the winter to end her bittersweet misery. Of course, the hellsots were the sole sweet part of her imprisonment. During the 3rd long night, when the darkness of the shrine was paramount, the cold made Kyoko so numb that she sensed her soul was escaping her body. Earlier she had found one more sweet on the ground. She must have missed it when Kara had left them in the shrine. The wrapper was dark brown, like rich soil. Inside was a dark cobalt blue type of nut, or sunflower seed. With nothing else to eat, and after the previous pleasurable hellsots, she didn't hesitate and sucked on the mildly sour sweet until the brown bark on the distant pine trees turned grey. That night, it was so cold that Kyoko imagined that she had become a Shiryo, a whirring ghost slinking over her sleeping body like sinuous incense smoke. She saw herself close her eyes. Soon afterwards, blue liquid trickled from her lips down to her left ear. A small spider crawled over her face and seemed to be probing her nostrils to see if the two holes would be suitable places to nest in. The warm air spiraling out dissuaded the arachnid that sprang away. Everything looked different. The shrine radiated bright turquoise outlines. The ivy leaves, the icicles, the locked gate, the rocks and shrews quivered with faint fluttering electricity, expiring glistening specks of sapphire energy. Dead. At last. At first she thought she really was dead. Her diaphanous corpse sank upwards into the hill above the shrine's ceiling, and for a few distant heartbeats, all went dark. Her relief turned to panic. What if this is all the afterlife has to offer? Complete darkness, alone for eternity. That prickling anguish evaporated as soon as the hill's soil, rocks and trees became transparent, and she saw herself sleeping again below. In the woods around the shrine, Kyoko saw two Huldra crouching at the gate. Their eyes opened wide when they spotted her over the Hillock Grotto and gave each other colluding looks. They soaked through the gate and hurried towards Kyoko's body, lying near the skeleton couple. The female Huldra held her hand out to the other and sat down on top of Kyoko's physical shell. She lied down supine and blended in to the sleeping human. A shower of tingling leaves spread through Kyoko's soul, floating upwards through the pine trees that were growing on the hill. She thought she could see the male Huldra with an arrow wound in his chest crawl over the female and glide forward. Kyoko felt a stab wound between her legs and flew out of control in spirals of turquoise snowflakes. She let out a cry and swooped through Naplewood's canopy at a frenetic speed. Her abdomen burned as she flew up the titanic trunk of an ancient ash tree. She illuminated the enormous gnarls as she flew past and caught glimpses of angry pale faces on branches as she ascended. The higher she rose, the slower she got. When the boiling sensation in her womb became almost intolerable, she froze mid-air, suspended by something other than the balance of gravity and her vertical thrust. She stared into the eyes of a terrifying shadow wearing half a white mask. The masked being's spectral appearance was difficult to depict in the shade. It lay like an alert hound on a thick bough with spread out branches. Kyoko thought she could see leathery wings draped over its shadowy body that ended in a fish-like tail. She was quite sure it couldn't see her, as it seemed to be staring right through her. But there was a palpable field of magnetic energy that felt almost sacred, but mostly deadly. I shouldn't be here, thought Kyoko. This isn't a dream. die. Kyoko heard the bell chime, then another, and the masked shadow glared. Soon the sound of 1,000 tiny ringing bells sucked her back down to the forest, ripped through myriad branches, back to the woodland shrine covered in immaculate shimmering snow. The prison was empty now. The Huldra had left. Kyoko sank through the hill to hover over her body, but she didn't know how to slip back in. That was when the pain resumed tenfold between her legs. Kyoko's physical, sweaty body shuddered, exhaling steamy heat from every pore. It reached out and clutched the hand of one of the skeletons. When a rush of insufferable pain rushed through Kyoko's spirit, her body writhing on the floor snapped off the skeleton hand and held it like a talisman on her chest. Kyoko saw fox kids in the grotto gloom. They started to run in circles around her body, yelping and snapping at each other's tails. Kyoko's legs spread wide open on the floor, and something furry slithered out from under her dirty yukata. A soggy foxtail. Kyoko's spirit and body screamed in one last excruciating effort to expulse the remaining fox out of her, and it slid to the floor in a pool of blood. The bright, reverberating gold colors in the woodland shrine went dark, and the skulk of foxes disbanded to their respective dens, with chunks of placenta in their jaws.